I've heard of him.
Apparently, and I think the story is true, then they have a meeting. You know, they do the meetings. And Diller said, you got the gal. You can do a hell of a lot better for the guy.
There are television shows that entertain, and then there are television shows that change the rules entirely. Married with Children was unquestionably the latter. For 11 seasons, from 1987 to 1997, the Bundy family stomped across American living rooms with muddy boots, refusing to wipe their feet at the door, refusing to apologize, and refusing to pretend that family life was anything other than the chaotic, exhausting, often hilarious grind that millions of viewers secretly recognized from their own lives. But decades after the final episode aired, one man has continued to pull back the curtain on what really made that show tick, and what most fans, even the most devoted ones, never fully understood. That man is Ed O'Neill, the actor who breathed life into Al Bundy, one of the most iconic characters in the history of American television. What Ed O'Neill has shared over the years, in interviews, in retrospectives, in candid moments at conventions and on podcasts, paints a picture far richer, far more complicated, and far more fascinating than anything that ever made it onto the screen. The story of Married with Children is not simply a story about a funny show. It is a story about rebellion, about survival, about an industry that tried to suffocate something genuine and found that it could not. And at the center of that story, holding everything together with sardonic wit and surprising emotional depth, was Ed O'Neill himself. Most people who watched Married with Children assumed that Al Bundy was a character carefully constructed through weeks of rehearsal, script analysis, and directorial collaboration. The truth is both simpler and more remarkable. When Ed O'Neill walked into that audition room in 1986, he was not thinking about technique or strategy. He was tired. He had spent years grinding through the entertainment industry, picking up roles where he could, never quite landing the breakthrough he was looking for. When he sat down on the couch in that casting room and let out a long, heavy sigh, a gesture he had unconsciously borrowed from watching his uncle come home exhausted after long days of manual labor, he was not performing. He was simply being. That unrehearsed, unguarded moment of genuine weariness was the thing that convinced show creators Michael Moye and Ron Levitt that they had found their man. They were not looking for a polished comedic performer. They were looking for someone who understood what it felt like to be beaten down by life and to keep showing up anyway. Ed O'Neill understood that feeling in his bones. He had grown up in Youngstown, Ohio, a working-class city that did not traffic in illusions or sentimentality. He had watched real men, his father, his uncles, his neighbors, carry the weight of lives that did not match their dreams, and do it without complaint and often without recognition. What most fans never realized is that Al Bundy's famous 1,000-yard stare, that glazed expression of a man who has accepted defeat but refuses to surrender, was not something O'Neill invented. It was something he remembered. He channeled the collective exhaustion of every working man he had ever known, and in doing so, he created something that resonated far beyond the boundaries of a Fox sitcom. Al Bundy became a mirror, and millions of Americans recognized their own reflection. Here is the thing that casual viewers missed, and that even devoted fans sometimes overlooked. Married with Children was not simply a comedy about a dysfunctional family. It was a pointed, sophisticated piece of social satire aimed directly at the heart of American consumer culture, at the mythology of the nuclear family, and at the suffocating optimism that dominated television in the 1980s. Ed O'Neill has spoken thoughtfully in various interviews about his understanding of the show's deeper purpose. While programs like The Cosby Show and Growing Pains were presenting families that solved their problems in 22 minutes with loving conversations and warm hugs, Married with Children was asking an uncomfortable question. What about the families that do not solve their problems? What about the people for whom life does not conveniently resolve itself before the credits roll? The Bundy household was a monument to unresolved tension, to deferred dreams, to the specific American tragedy of working hard and getting very little in return. Al Bundy had once been a high school football legend. He had once had potential, ambition, a future. By the time we met him, he was measuring women's feet for a living in a mall shoe store, coming home to a wife who did not cook and children who did not respect him, collapsing on a couch with his hand in his waistband as his most assertive act of self-expression. And yet, and this is the genius that O'Neill brought to the role, Al was never entirely pathetic. He was defeated but not destroyed. He still had his dignity, even if that dignity expressed itself as stubbornness, sarcasm, and an almost heroic resistance to self-improvement. O'Neill understood that AL's refusal to change was not laziness. It was a form of integrity. Al Bundy was a man who had been promised something by the American dream and had received something very different, and his sulking, his complaining, his endless schemes and inevitable failures, these were the authentic responses of a real human being navigating disappointment. That authenticity is what the audience connected with, even when they could not articulate why. One of the great secrets of Married with Children's success was the chemistry between its 4 lead actors, and Ed O'Neill has been candid about the fact that this chemistry was not engineered or manufactured. It emerged organically, sometimes from conflict, sometimes from shared laughter, always from the genuine personalities of the people involved. Katie Sagal, who played Peggy Bundy, was a professional musician before she became an actress. She brought a performer's instincts to the role, a sense of timing, a comfort with an audience, a willingness to commit completely to a moment. O'Neill has spoken admiringly of Sagal's courage in embodying Peggy, a character who violated virtually every convention of how women were portrayed on television. Peggy was lazy, manipulative, vain, and completely unashamed of all of it. She was also, in her own twisted way, deeply loyal to her family. Sagal played all of those contradictions simultaneously, and the result was a character as complex and as funny as any in the sitcom canon. Christina Applegate joined the cast at 15 years old, playing Kelly Bundy with an energy and comedic instinct that belied her age. O'Neill has described working with Applegate as a revelation. Watching a teenager find the rhythm of a live studio audience, learning to land a joke, discovering the particular pleasure of physical comedy. What fans did not know was how much the older cast members worked, quietly and informally, to support and protect Applegate as she navigated both the demands of the role and the unwanted attention that came with becoming a teenage sex symbol in the late 1980s. David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, brought a different energy. Sharper, more cerebral, always slightly scheming. The dynamic between the 4 Bundys felt real because, in an important sense, it was real. They had developed genuine affection for one another, genuine exasperation with one another, genuine loyalty to one another. O'Neill has said that what he misses most about that period of his career is not the fame or the ratings but the experience of walking onto that set every day and knowing exactly who he was working with and what they were capable of. In 1989, Married with Children became the target of a nationwide boycott campaign that would have destroyed a lesser show. A viewer in Michigan named Terry Ricalta wrote letters to the show's advertisers after watching an episode she found offensive, and several major brands pulled their sponsorship in response. Fox pulled a particularly provocative episode from the broadcast schedule. For a brief period, it appeared that the Bundy family's run might be coming to an early end. What happened instead was one of the most fascinating reversals in television history. The boycott generated massive national media coverage. Newspapers ran stories about the show. Television news programs debated its merits and its dangers. Millions of Americans who had never watched Married with Children suddenly became very curious about this program that had apparently shocked the nation. Ratings climbed. The audience grew. The show that was supposed to be shamed into obscurity became one of Fox's most valuable properties. Ed O'Neill has reflected on this period with characteristic directness. The controversy, he has suggested, forced the writers and the cast to be more precise, more intentional, more committed to what they were doing. When you know that every line is being scrutinized, you stop being careless. The pressure clarified things. It made the show sharper. And it demonstrated something important about the American audience, that there was a massive hunger for programming that treated viewers as adults, that did not flinch from uncomfortable truths, that was willing to be genuinely provocative rather than safely edgy. The episode that Fox pulled from the broadcast schedule, centering on the Bundys and their neighbors discovering that a hotel had been secretly filming guests, did not air in the United States until 2002, and even then in edited form. O'Neill has noted that this kind of censorship always struck him as slightly absurd given that the show's comedy was rooted in exaggeration and satire rather than genuine prurience. But he also acknowledged that the battle over what Married with Children was allowed to say and show was part of a larger cultural conversation about the boundaries of broadcast television, a conversation that the show helped to reshape permanently. The picture of Married with Children that most fans carry is one of a happy, anarchic set where talented people came together to make something irreverent and fun. The reality was more complicated. Ed O'Neill has been forthright about the tensions that existed within the cast and crew, tensions that were sometimes creative and productive and sometimes personal and painful. His relationship with Amanda Bearse, who played next-door neighbor Marcy, was notably strained at various points during the show's run. When a prominent television magazine featured the 4 main Bundy cast members on a cover without including Bearse or David Garrison, who played her husband, the slight registered. O'Neill has acknowledged that he wishes he had spoken up more forcefully at the time to advocate for his colleagues. The distance between him and Bearse grew over the years and persisted through the remainder of the series, a genuine regret that he has expressed in retrospective conversations. The most emotionally wrenching behind-the-scenes story involved Katie Sagal's personal tragedy in 1991. Sagal was pregnant during production, and the writers had incorporated her pregnancy into Peggy Bundy's storyline. Then, at 7 months, Sagal suffered a devastating miscarriage. The production had to pivot quickly and completely, rewriting the pregnancy storyline as a dream sequence, AL's dream, so that Sagal would not have to return to work and immediately perform comedy about a pregnancy that no longer existed. It was an act of creative problem-solving, but it was also, on a human level, an act of care. Sagal has spoken about how difficult it was to return to the set in the weeks that followed, and how the support of her castmates helped her through one of the hardest periods of her life. There were physical challenges too. O'Neill has mentioned back pain resulting from the physical comedy that Al Bundy required. The falls, the wrestling, the contortions of a man perpetually collapsing onto furniture. Each episode was filmed before a live studio audience of several hundred people, which added the particular pressure of a theatrical performance to the already demanding work of television production. When a joke landed, you knew it immediately. When it did not, that knowledge was equally immediate. This is perhaps the most interesting question, and the one that O'Neill has answered most thoughtfully over the years. What does he actually think of the character who defined the most famous chapter of his career? The answer is more nuanced than fans might expect. O'Neill does not dismiss Al Bundy as a simple cartoon. He sees in Al a genuine complexity, a man whose flaws are inseparable from his virtues, whose bitterness is the flip side of his once genuine ambition, whose love for his family expresses itself in ways that are almost never warm or demonstrative but are nonetheless real. Al never leaves. Al never gives up. Al shows up to that shoe store every single day even though it represents everything that went wrong in his life, because he is, beneath all the grumbling, a responsible man who takes his obligations seriously. O'Neill has spoken about the danger of playing a character like Al Bundy, the risk of reducing him to a punchline, of going for the easy laugh at the expense of the character's humanity. What he tried to do, consistently across 11 seasons, was to keep Al recognizable as a real person even in the most absurd situations. That grounding was what made the comedy work. The audience laughed at Al, but they also recognized something of themselves or someone they knew in him, and that recognition gave the laughter a warmth that pure caricature could never achieve. He has also been candid about the challenge of separating himself from Al after years of embodying the character. When Married with Children ended in 1997, O'Neill faced the question that confronts every actor who has played an iconic role. Who are you when the character is gone? His subsequent career, particularly his long run as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, a character who shared certain surface traits with Al Bundy but was fundamentally different in his relationship to his family and his life, demonstrated that he was far more than Al Bundy. But he has never pretended that Al Bundy was not the role of a lifetime, the role that required everything he had and gave him back something he could not have found any other way. When Married with Children filmed its final episode in 1997, there was no grand send-off, no tearful farewell press conference, no season-ending celebration. The show simply stopped. Ed O'Neill found out that the series had been cancelled not from a network executive or a producer, but from strangers who approached him to offer their condolences. Christina Applegate heard the news on the radio while driving to work. For a show that had been a cultural institution for over a decade, the ending was remarkably unceremonious. O'Neill has described this abruptness with a mixture of amusement and residual bewilderment. There was no closure, no ritual marking of the end of something significant. One day they were making episodes, and then they were not. The absence of ceremony felt, in retrospect, entirely in keeping with the spirit of the show. The Bundys did not get fairy tale endings, so perhaps it was appropriate that the actors who played them did not get one either. What O'Neill has come to understand in the decades since is that the show's ending did not actually end anything. Married with Children continued to find audiences through reruns and later through streaming platforms. New generations of viewers discovered the Bundy family and found in them the same things their parents had found. A comedy that was bracingly honest, that treated its audience with intelligence, that found the absurdity at the heart of ordinary American life and refused to look away from it. The influence of Married with Children on American television is difficult to overstate. The show's willingness to portray a family that was genuinely dysfunctional, not charmingly quirky, not heartwarming beneath the surface, but actually recognizably flawed, opened a door that subsequent television walked through enthusiastically. The animated dysfunction of The Simpsons, the cheerful nihilism of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the raw family comedy of Roseanne, all of these shows owe a debt to what the Bundys demonstrated was possible on American television. Ed O'Neill understands this legacy, and he carries it with genuine pride. What he has tried to articulate, in the years since the show ended, is something that most fans intuitively feel but have trouble putting into words. Married with Children was not mean-spirited. It was honest. There is a difference. Mean-spirited comedy punches down, takes pleasure in cruelty, leaves its audience feeling worse about humanity. Honest comedy looks at the ways human beings actually behave, the pettiness, the selfishness, the failure to live up to our own ideals, and finds the comedy in recognition rather than in contempt. The audience laughed at Al Bundy not because they were superior to him but because they understood him. That understanding, that sense of being seen and recognized by a television show rather than flattered and reassured, was what made Married with Children matter. And it is why, nearly 3 decades after its finale, the show continues to find new viewers who discover in the Bundy household something they were not expecting, a reflection of the truth. If there is one thing that emerges consistently from Ed O'Neill's reflections on Married with Children, it is this. The show was made by real people who cared deeply about what they were doing, who fought for its integrity, who gave more of themselves to it than the audience ever knew. The laughter that came so easily at home required enormous work, personal sacrifice, creative courage, and a willingness to keep going even when the industry was hostile and the controversy was deafening. Al Bundy was, on the surface, a loser. A man who peaked in high school and spent the rest of his life nursing that wound. But Ed O'Neill played him as something more than that. As a man who, despite everything, kept showing up. Kept fighting. Kept finding reasons to laugh at his own catastrophic circumstances. And in doing so, O'Neill gave American television one of its most enduring and most human characters. The fans who loved Married with Children loved it for the jokes, for the outrageousness, for the transgressive pleasure of watching a family that said out loud what most families only thought. But what they were really responding to, whether they knew it or not, was the truth at the center of it all. The deeply human truth that Ed O'Neill carried with him from Youngstown, Ohio to Hollywood and embedded in every scene he ever played. Life is hard. People disappoint you. Things do not turn out the way you planned. And somehow, improbably, life keeps being funny anyway. That is what Ed O'Neill revealed about Married with Children. And that